Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of our brand new Talking with Apes podcast. First of all, we'll introduce ourselves because we forgot last time. So, Tom, tell us about you.
I'm Tom. I don't know what you want to say. I'm an activist with a specialty in climate. I guess that's I think the best way to describe it. I'm interested in basically every problem in society, but I read most on climate change.
And why did you want to start Talking with Apes together with me?
Because I think there is a need for a bit of a European conversation on all these societal problems.
Kina, what about you?
Well, I'm not one of the co-founders. The co-founders are you and Tom. But I joined because I found what you guys do is very admirable, very important too, to have that kind of English-speaking conversation that's happening around these topics. And it's honestly the first one I saw in Belgium. You would think that we're too late to the party. You would think that there already exists a lot of people that's doing what we do. That's not true, at least in Belgium.
And not in English.
Yeah, and definitely not in English. Who I am, I work in automation. I'm interested in societal problems and especially technologically speaking, like the threat of automation. I literally work in automation and we've touched on the threat of automation last time on the podcast. I'm interested about artificial intelligence. I'm interested in all of this stuff and how can we try to make it serve society instead of leading us toward a fucking dystopia.
I'm Morgan. I'm one of the co-founders together with Tom, and I really thought it was important to start some sort of independent media platform because, I'm studying media and I have noticed that there's not that much variety within Belgium, especially as Keenan said, when we're talking English media and internationally accessible media that you can access for free and that is not like super influenced by right-wing politics.
You're listening to a bunch of lefties.
Yes. Since this is like only voice is like hearable, I'm trans, so use he him pronouns please. And I am also interested in LGBT issues, obviously.
Indeed. For me also, something I forgot to mention, since Tom said we're a bunch of lefties and you have a migrant between you.
Yes.
Yes.
A Syrian refugee. So a terrorist.
Indeed. So I am also obviously very interested in the idea of presenting some kind of content and some kind of activism to people who do not speak Dutch, where we live, where everybody does speak Dutch. Sometimes it's very difficult to find that kind of content and to feel connected to the activist society. There's a lot of people we know that are here in Belgium, and once they came here, they lost all sense of activism and group, and they're like not interested into it anymore because they couldn't find that international vibe and that they lost the language they use. But, yeah,
and like today we're actually talking about something connected to that, like the way that people that are not Belgian are treated differently within Europe, Belgium. Like the other day I was listening to the radio and I heard that there is apparently more than 18,000 migrant children, like refugee children, missing in Europe between 2018 and 2020. And it was the first time I heard about it. And I thought that was really shocking. So I talked to Tom and Keenan and we said, let's talk about it. Let's try to give it a platform. Because how the fuck do we not know about this already? How is this not everywhere? It's 18,000 children missing. Usually if there's one child missing, like there's helicopters everywhere. Yeah.
Well, first of all, we think it's 18,000. That's from a study, but many platforms are debating whether or not it's more people, because of course it's always guesswork how many people are not there. You can't ask them. Or maybe if it is less, or if other people aren't taken into account in that number, because they disappear, but they pop up somewhere else. It is basically not simply people just being lost, but people disappearing from the European governments. Basically, people not being known where they are within Europe.
Yeah, like Tom explained, so the issue here is especially like children and young people. You would think that Europe and member states of the European Union, the European Committee would be interested in knowing where the fuck these children are. But even if they do pop up later, they appear in a different country, or they're not actually kidnapped or like human trafficked or anything, we still don't know. And not knowing is pretty bad when you're talking about children. You want?
Yeah, and like these children, they're okay. Like the reason why these children are missing, like let's talk about that for a moment. Mm-hmm. It's mainly because the European Union has a very a system for registering these children that it fails them most of the time. And so there's all of these, and these children are also like very afraid when they come to Europe, which is understandable. Like they're minors, sometimes they don't have their family with them, and they hear all these stories of grown-ups being sent back to their country, and although that wouldn't really happen to them, they still think it might, etc. So they are very vulnerable to people that want to harm them, like smugglers, for example, or people that want to, get them into human trafficking, etc. And if I understood it right, the European Union doesn't really have to care, because the smugglers make them sign a contract that
Not
they
sign
are...
a contract, it's more of a deal. So you're in Turkey or Greece or whatever, and you want to get smuggled into Europe, into mainland Europe, as they call it. And you pay a smuggler, or you pay somebody who's advertising themselves as a smuggler to get you across the borders. There's no contract, but the European Union and the people who want to sweep this under the rug and like not take the responsibility for it are like, well, it's basically a business transaction. You're paying somebody to do something, and it's your responsibility because you're not being kidnapped or anything. You're paying them.
Yeah,
But
so the European Commission is, first of all, aware of this. We, as the broad public, might not hear a lot about this, but the Commission and the European institutions and a lot of the member states are very much aware of how bad this is. And it's a conscious choice to ignore it. But indeed,
But why is it so bad? Like, okay, I get what you're saying, but just...
Well,
like,
first of all, because they want to ignore it. They don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, but like what Keenan just said, like, okay, they pay a smuggler and the smuggler gets them into like Germany or whatever, and like everyone is happy in the end, right? Or not?
So the country is happy because it doesn't have to deal with this further. But the people, of course, often then get tossed into a human trafficking system. Once they're within the European Union, and that can be anything from sex work to other criminal, not sex work isn't a criminal act, but to criminal acts like theft and other things that people don't want to be in, of course.
So, in summary, these children, they ask a smuggler to smuggle them, and once they arrive, they are picked up by human traffickers, and that's how they disappear, or how?
Sometimes that's what happens. Sometimes we just don't know. What would happen is, like, you have to understand that there is a lot of children who get sent from their home country to take the exodus ride to Europe, to seek refuge, to seek asylum, and sometimes it's a conscious choice to send a child alone because there isn't enough resources to send more family members or send a child with a guardian. So I know it sounds super negligent to send your child like that into the wild, but sometimes it is really the only choice. And what happens is, okay, this child, we talk to a friend of the family or something, or somebody we trust, quote unquote, but then that person give them to another person, and that person give them to another person, and then that child is like left to its own devices, and they have a certain budget, and they want to use that budget to get to mainland Europe. And yes, most of the times what happens is, most of the time they make it. Actually, like most of the time, they do make it to mainland Europe. Sometimes they make it and they get registered. Sometimes they don't get registered, and that's what was Tom talking about. They pop up later. They get sent to another country without being fingerprinted or anything. And that's the problem here. We think the problem is that because of the European Union handling of people getting into mainland Europe, like if you end up in Hungary or Croatia or Greece, you don't, like I'm talking out of experience here, you don't want to get identified. Everybody tells you don't get fingerprinted, don't get ID'd, because if you do, once you reach the country of your destination, you will get sent back to Greece, because that's where technically the European Union is like, well, you arrived in Greece, you should be handled by Greece asylum system.
You are a refugee of Greece, and
Yes.
Greece's problem.
Yes. But you don't want to be in Greece, because obviously Greece does not treat you very well, because they're underfunded and overworked. And let's be real, the European Union did they put all of this pressure on Greece.
Don't be too nice about it. They squeezed Greece for everything.
Exactly.
It's
And you hear terrible fucking stories about the Greek sinking boats with children in them, but this doesn't happen right away. This happened after years and years of Greek
austerity and...
So yeah, to get back to the point of like these children, is some of them do get to the destination, and some of them don't. And where do these children go?
But if I understand it right, this number, like the 18,000 and so much, children are children that have been registered in Western Europe,
And then
they disappeared.
Yes, that's the basis. If you didn't have that basis, well, we're talking about a much bigger.
Of course, yeah, the number of children that disappear. But like, how can it happen that even though these children are cared for, or they are registered in the European system, they are supposed to be cared for, like how can they then still disappear?
Well,
because there, first of all, is no European system. The European Union, for as far as I'm aware, has no central data bank. So it has no way of, as a whole, dealing with this registration system or process. Which means that a child is registered, for example, in Greece, if it does, and then disappears in Greece. The Greek government suddenly loses track of this child, and then it pops up in France, for example. But those two are also not talking to each other, maybe, and therefore the French and the Greek government don't have the same information, or do have the same information, but are basically not putting it together that this is the same information.
I think their information does exist. Like from what I remember, when people are talking about like being fingerprinted and stuff, like your fingerprint goes to a central database, or at least a mock-up of a central database. Like when people get sent back to Croatia, or get sent back to Turkey, or get sent back to Greece, that's what the asylum country is talking about. It's like, well, we find that you have your fingerprinted in Greece. Why aren't you in Greece? So they do have kind of a record, but they do not use it to the greater good. They use it in the other direction. They use it to persecute and take autonomy away from people seeking refuge. And that's why, that's the big problem. Like, it is demotivated. It's discouraged to trust the European countries. When you're in that kind of situation, it's much easier to trust somebody speaking your own language, somebody claiming to want the best for you, than the police forces or the law enforcement who are understaffed and overworked and frankly do not care about you at all. That's what happens usually. And if we're talking solutions right away, well, one of the bigger problems, I think, like from the research Tom did, it's that the European countries are sometimes unwilling or unable to work with language speaking and people who speak the same language, like diaspora or like people from the same culture. Why do you not make sense of this resource? Like, if you're having a problem with missing children and children not trusting you, you have a community within your country that probably does want to help, but it's never asked to.
Yeah, I also think one thing we talked about before is maybe assigning a fixed guardian to a child once it arrives within a country, like a guardian that speaks the language. I mean, of course, one guardian can take care of several children, but so the child has one central point of like to refer to if it's afraid, if it needs something, like we're talking about children as young as 10, 12 that have to travel alone, or, like some children, their parents just die or their parents get into human trafficking and they make it. Like there is so many stories, and they're just, the one solution is the solution is there. Like it might work for a 17-year-old that knows what like it needs and that knows what country it wants to go to, that has enough money. Like for that refugee child, maybe there is like a system. This system is fine, but for a 12-year-old that lost a parent on the way and is just afraid, as Keenan said, of course they're gonna trust someone who speaks their language, someone who reminds them of home much more than some governmental institution that they have no connection to.
And I mean, it's not just a situation of trust. It is a situation of pure incompetence and stupidity on the side of the governments. Often, even in Belgium, young people are put on a train in group and just told to go to a certain place with no like guardianship or nobody going along for the ride. Well, I mean, what can you how can you not expect that to go wrong? You have a bunch of people that recently arrived in another continent often that probably don't speak the language. Unfortunately, Belgium is not the prime example of English speaking and internationalism in that sense.
Indeed.
So the local populace is also not going to be able to just magically talk to them. And then you tell them go to this specific place.
Yeah, this village.
It's a recipe for disaster. And then add on top of that the distrust for the government, which functions in a very cold bureaucratic way, very impersonal, because there's no link with the communities, with other diaspora. There is no, there's all these bad stories going around about if you get fingerprinted, you get sent back to that other country. Don't go there, don't do that. It just creates the perfect recipe for disaster and for a failing integration system. Compare that with something that I didn't put in the notes, but that I know the Netherlands have evolved a little bit on the subject of integration, where they now use a lot of civil society organizations to connect with people on a more personal basis when they enter the country.
Yeah, and these organizations want to help.
Yeah, and you create a personal link. We are social creatures. It only makes sense to do it that way.
Indeed. And honestly, like if we're being honest, like even I can tell you from experience, when I came to seek asylum in Belgium, I ended up my first city was Brussels. That's what everybody tells you. Go to Brussels because they have the Center for Refugees there, the commissariat. And you apply. It takes 3 days or something. You stand in line.
How old were you at the time?
I was
16, 17?
No. I was 18 or 19. I mean, yeah, I was treated as an adult, obviously. Like I was technically an adult. And I got there, and from there I got sent to Liège, which is a country in the south of Belgium. City in the south of Belgium, sorry. And yeah, like when I ended up in Liège, there was actually some Red Cross people from Moroccan descent, from Lebanese descent, who spoke the language and they wanted to help. But my journey, when I first arrived in Belgium, when I first arrived in Greece, it was never right away welcoming. It was never, okay, here's the resources you can use to do whatever you want to do. It was a fight against being sent back. It was a fight against being caught. I remember in Greece, we wanted to register for a paper that allowed us to move from one island to the capital of Greece, to Athens, because it's the center of all of the smuggling and stuff. And in order to get that paper, you need to basically jump a wired wall to get into the center to stand in line. And that's what we did. And you can see how unwelcoming that is. And on the same time I was on that island, riots happened inside one of the detention centers. And detention centers, when you hear that word, you think of criminals. You think of lawbreakers. You think of people who are dangerous. But we're talking here about literally children and civilians, and they just came into Greece. There is literally no difference between them and all of the tourists on these fucking islands. But they were put into the detention center without being allowed to leave, without giving them food or water, which resulted in a riot. And you can see, from there, you're already distrusting all of these people.
And I don't want to take away of the gravity, so tell me if this is highly inappropriate, but I get it from the way you're describing it and from reading the articles. It almost feels like the European Union has basically created a Hunger Games kind of scenario.
Yeah.
You jump over this highly dangerous fence, survive this conflict with other refugees, pitting people against each other, making it as hard as possible to basically get out of that situation.
And if you make it, you make it.
Congratulations, and you're one of the good guys.
Yeah, if you make it to Athens, actually, the people on the airport, if you're smuggling yourself with an airplane, which is one of the more expensive options, which is not available to everybody. I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. The people at the airport they know you're a refugee. And what they do basically every day, they let 50% of the people get aboard the plane and 50% have to try again. That's it. It was clear that these people didn't care about identification. They only cared about, okay, how do we move this problem from this country to another country? So it's not our problem anymore. It even happened to me in Germany. In Germany, I was caught, quote unquote, by a train inspector who saw my Syrian passport, who I spoke to, and I was like, hey, just take me to the closest detention center or whatever, to seek asylum in Germany. She pretended not to understand English and sent me on my way.
To be fair, if you're just in a random spot in Germany, you might come across someone who doesn't speak English. That is a possibility.
Fair enough. But I think I was pretty obvious. I was not that conspicuous. But, the idea of, we don't want the trouble. Just do whatever you want. But that's not a problem. But if I was a child, and I looked like a child, I did look like a child. But nobody cared.
You did have a beard, though.
Did I? No, I shaved it actually before I got on the train on Germany.
But even in that sense, regardless of whether somebody is an adult or a child,
you want identification.
Yeah, and people don't magically turn into this all-knowing, responsible individual when they're 18 years old. It's not like Cinderella, the clock hits 12 and suddenly,
I don't know what you're talking about, Tom. That is exactly how it went for me.
Yeah, exactly.
So the wisdom just started getting down.
So one of the biggest things is
up.
Not down.
No, getting down from the sky onto your head.
It fell on me.
It fell on you.
Yes.
So one of the biggest things, one of the big problems is for especially children, it is so important whether or not they get whether they get registered as adults or as children, because it makes such a big difference whether or not you can be sent back.
Not only that, it makes difference for your whole life as an asylum seeker, actually. I know a friend who sought asylum in Finland or Sweden, and because he was 17 and 6 months at the time, he got treated as a minor. He got right to an education. He got right to actual good housing. He didn't have time to. He didn't have to spend time at the Red Cross camp. He got such a nice life compared to people who are 6 months older than him.
Yeah, and
So-
it makes no sense because obviously, sure, children should get extra care, obviously, but there is, again, no magical button that gets pushed that changes all of that. And you want basically everyone to be, at least to a certain degree, educated, or to be, given
To
the
give
opportunity
them also
to integrate.
Yeah, the possibility to integrate because, yeah.
Okay, but let's see. We talked about the problem. Is it fair to say that the European Union states are not tackling this issue?
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
In my opinion, yes. I mean, they know about the numbers.
Isn't it like a lack of resource? Isn't it a lack of funding?
But to be fair, I also think there's a lack of publicity on it. Like when I talked about this, neither of you was like, "Oh yeah, obviously I know about this.
No,
I
I
hear
didn't
about
know."
it all
Yeah,
the
true,
time." Like, and politicians also work in the way where they only change something if there is like public pressure to do something about it.
Yes, and there is a let's be fair about this at the risk of sounding like a communist or anarchist again, which I don't have a problem with though. There is a neoliberal or liberal. There is a status quo when it comes to migration, at least in Belgium and also in the entirety of Europe. The only exception to that was Angela Merkel at one point when she, for a moment, said "Wir schaffen das." There is the status quo that on the left and the right, they both agree on this. Migration should be limited, should be just, but stern and controlled and limited. There is this attitude. In Belgium, the migration policy hasn't changed, whether it is a right-wing nationalist, whether it is a liberal or a social democrat sitting in the chair, and now a Christian Democrat. There is no real big change in migration policy. So there is a status quo. Nobody wants to, see the people coming in, apparently. And if you would be extremely democratic and poll in Europe, probably a big part of the population wouldn't either. That is due to also politicians not being, willing to create a platform for it. People are not informed of what migration really is and are mostly told about the dangers and the risks that come along with it or all the big trouble.
The Mexicans coming to rape our children and take our jobs.
Yeah, or people, or migrants stabbing people in the middle of Germany. Where was it? And other bullshit like that.
Yes, and we rarely talk about all the right-wing terrorists we have in these countries.
Let's not mention that today in Belgium. But I mean, the National Bank of Belgium has shown in a study, which was ordered by a right-wing minister, by the way, that migration has a positive effect on the economy. It does. The only variable...
I thought you were going to talk about the fucked up study that Bertje did, where like...
No, that's a different thing. Drug policies for another time. War on drugs. No, the National Bank in Belgium has proven like migration has a positive effect on the economy if you integrate those people in your economic, social, cultural,
Of course.
political society, which is exactly what the European Union is refusing. They focus a lot on Frontex, on the border control, but they don't put a lot of effort and energy and money into integration systems.
Yeah, it's actually amazing how much resources they put into finding where you've been and where to send you back if they could.
Yeah. I mean, also, like, talking about needing migration, European countries aren't always doing the best with keeping up the population, which is needed.
I mean, yeah, is there any policy, like I haven't heard of a policy of a European country that allows for legal migration, if that's, because legal migration is good.
But we used to have, like, gastarbeiders? I don't know the
Yes.
English word for that. It used to be huge, like, I
Guest
remember...
workers.
Yeah, I remember in Germany, the 1 millionth Italian guest worker got like a free Vespa or something from the state, and it was a huge party, and it was like, yes, we are getting these workforces that are like doing all our manual labor, and it's like great, and everyone's happy, and where is that attitude? Like,
it's not there anymore.
It got put in the same box as the coal mines when they closed in Belgium. That's the reason why Belgium has such a significant Moroccan, Italian diaspora, because those people were invited to come and work in Belgium, to mostly work in the mines. But when those mines closed, so did the friendly attitude of inviting people. I mean, America was one of the most welcoming countries to migrants, in order to manifest destiny across its continent and, occupy the territory formerly by the indigenous people. But now that they have reached the other ocean, the other side of the continent, they're a little less welcoming. Of course, it's like more. There are more variables to that story, but or more elements to that story. But it's one of the big things, If you need workforce, then everybody is very welcome. The moment things get a bit tight.
Indeed, but honestly, I do feel we talking about did Europe handle its migration problem, quote unquote, well enough or not, is something of another topic. Here we're talking about countries who signed international laws, who said, actually, we care about children no matter where they come from, and we're asking them to take action here. We're seeing that there is a real problem concerning children, concerning people who are underage, concerning people who just exist, and to not publicize this enough and not talk about it enough, and to just try to juke the stats, basically, looking at the stats. Is it an adult? Is it a child? Is it actually a smuggling issue, or is it a human trafficking issue? Well, if you don't know, I say you should consider it a human trafficking issue, because you don't know. And it could be very well that they get trafficked. I don't know if you guys remember that story, but when I first came here, there was this story of people trying to get into a van to travel from Greece to mainland Europe, and the person, the driver of the van, wasn't aware of this smuggling situation, and he left the door closed for more than 72 hours, and everybody suffocated inside that fucking van.
Oh, yeah, I remember that, yeah.
I feel like this kind of story should be well, maybe we should have some policies that discourage people from trusting these smugglers. And these smugglers obviously are pieces of shit. They take advantage of something so horrible. But I can tell you from experience too, in Greece, these smugglers do not try to hide. They advertise themselves actively and publicly because they know there isn't enough scrutiny, because the Greek government is well, these people are basically helping us get rid of this migrant problem.
It's a very perverse situation where the governments are basically in a more beneficial position when they let the criminality go on,
yes,
and the system go on, and the people kind of benefit from it. So it continues to get fed and to be used.
Yeah. And maybe I am a bit naive or a bit radical in my thinking here, but I think what should be done is these smugglers, their place in society, their role in this story should be replaced by a legitimate path from Greece, from Turkey, to mainland Europe. If somebody wants to seek asylum in Germany or in Belgium or France, let them do it safely. These people are children. These people are poor. These people don't have enough money. They don't speak the language. They're just seeking a better life. And they're going to come here anyway, like you've seen. They're either going to come here or they're going to end up being human trafficked and prostituted or sexually abused.
And let's be real. I mean, it's going to happen. So the right-wing approach of trying to keep it all closed and tight,
it's not going to work.
It doesn't work. It clearly doesn't work. And the left should not take on the same stance. It should be honest and follow its own principles, and that is system change, and thus changing the mechanisms by which this now happens, changing the criminal system on which people have to rely, getting rid of that, replacing it by a legitimate one, allowing for freedom of movement, which at least for a long time was a lefty idea.
And should be a human fucking right.
And easy, yeah. I mean, the freedom of mobility is so important.
And if you want people to try, like if you take that step, what you need to do before that, actually, I think, is to gain people's trust again. By when you're welcoming refugees or welcoming migrants or welcoming people, don't treat them as criminals. Don't put them in fucking detention centers. I recognize the lack of resources, at least in that period, like in 2016, 2017, where it's like it was a huge influx. And even then, I don't really buy it. Like,
I mean, the European countries can do a lot if they really want to. I mean, we have
Exactly.
seen with Corona how much they want. If they want something, they can do it. We see it. I mean, we're going to watch it in a few hours with Eurovision. They can organize a fucking broadcast across the continent up to Australia. If you really want to...
with a stage full of people.
Exactly.
In Corona times.
The European community can do a fucking lot if it wants to.
Yeah.
It is a question of, do you want to?
And if we want to change this approach, we should recognize that the European community and the European society is, like the American society, is a country, and that is a society that is partially migrants. And these migrants have always been part of the society, and they will continue to be. That's the mentality that, like, if we're trying to influence public opinion here and people like who vote, well, I want you to understand that no matter where you are, no matter if you're in a right-wing village in the countryside or in the city, your country has always had migrants in it. And these migrants have always benefited your country. It's not a debatable thing. Like you saw that right-wing politician who asked the National Bank of Belgium, hey, prove me right by saying that migrants are useless for the economy. They prove him wrong.
Turns out they're not.
Yeah. So,
But yeah, and to speak to the counter argument or the fear that the country is going to get overrun by these migrants. No, they're not. Like when Luxembourg was forced to take in 12 people in Luxembourg. Not even 12 people wanted to go to Luxembourg. The Prime Minister of Luxembourg had trouble finding 12 people that wanted to be refugees in Luxembourg. Now you can have an emotional reaction to that and say, oh, these people aren't grateful for what they are offered. But the truth is, nobody fucking knows about Luxembourg the same way nobody wants to. The same way people don't want to stay in Belgium necessarily because it isn't, strangely enough, the greatest country on earth.
same as in most people actually don't want to leave their countries, don't want to leave their societies, but they're often forced to.
And the countries that are overrun, which are Italy and Greece now in this
They're
system,
border countries that are not being helped by the European states.
yeah, they also don't get the resources. So there's no solidarity there, which again, to the left-wing parties, stop saying you're not for open borders and not for blah, 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 and start talking in your own terms and in your own principles. Talk about the solidarity between countries and various peoples. Start talking about the freedom of mobility. Start talking about, the integration system, which has to be like strengthened. That is the issue at hand.
But also, like, to be more concrete about this issue, just start treating refugee children that go missing the same that you would treat a child from a European country that goes missing. If it's not been seen for 48 hours, you send the fucking police. You send the
Exactly.
army if necessary, Like,
The German police, when they were presented with the numbers, said, like, yeah, this isn't a priority case for us.
yeah, and this is unacceptable. Like, I mean, in Belgium, we had the case Dutroux, where it was like 7 children that went missing and they ended up in sexual shit, abuse. And it was the story. Like, for years, it was a huge story. And like, we have a case here where, okay, out of those 18,000, maybe not all 18,000 ended up in human trafficking, but we don't know, and that's the issue.
Yes, indeed. It's a child is a child, and these countries who signed the United Nations Treaty of what was it? The rights of the child.
Yes.
The rights of the child are not the rights of the Belgian child or the German child or the Swiss child. It's the right of the child, and these children are children, and I don't know if that's too naive or too.
It's not. It's
I
just
mean,
not.
last-
These
like-
children are children and they should be treated the same
Indeed,
way
but
a
what I-
white child would be treated.
Indeed, but I was gonna say, like, I don't know if it's naive to expect a country to respect the treaties it signed, just when there is no enforcement. The UN can't enforce any of this.
Well, but we, the citizens, can enforce it. We can
Indeed.
vote against any party that does not. So, yeah, that's maybe
Vote the
the main...
motherfuckers out.
Yeah, but for now, at least, like from what I have understand, not a single political party cares about this. Not even the leftists.
No, or to a very limited degree. At best, they will talk about like a little bit of funding for the border countries or
Exactly, but there's also no
Or-
publicity on it. So, like,
Exactly.
spread the news, share this podcast with anyone who cares about children, which I hope are many people in your life.
if cafes are
And-
open, just mention at some point when you're at the
just
bar.
talk about
Fun
it.
fact: 18,000 children are missing.
Yes.
Anyways, skål, guys. Let's drink our beer now.
Okay, so we'll see you next time, and I hope you learned something. I hope you care about children. I hope you